is going on out there, and I really, really appreciate it. I also want to thank you too, just in this broader moment that we're in, that you've made the choice to gather, that you allowed yourself to be in community with each other. And my hope is that tonight you will come away with some stories that change the way that you think about things, give you something new to think about, and maybe you'll meet somebody new. And now, before we begin, I am going to invite you all to just take a breath. Let your body arrive, even your mind is still rushing. And we have some visitors who have come all the way from Nairobi. We have folks who come from Gold Valley. We have folks who have come from all over the metro area. And we have Hawa tonight from New York. You made it here. Whatever that means to you, that's not a small thing. At Alight, we work with millions of people who are navigating in between what was and what will be, between loss and possibility, between the unfamiliar and between the deeply human longing for home. And we believe that even in the most uncertain spaces, beauty can take root. We ground our work in 7 values: be human-centered, bravely be better, find others, do the doable, choose optimism, start with giving, and spark joy. These values will serve as anchors for our conversation tonight. So Hawa, wherever you all are in your own journey, whatever you're carrying into this room, there is a place for you here. And so I'm wondering if everybody could say hello to Hawa first from wherever you're sitting. Hello. Hi everyone. And since we're all getting to know each other, I am wondering if you could complete the sentence for me. This is my friend Hawa, and she.
I am Khadija Osman's daughter.
And for those of you who are unfamiliar, could you give us a bar-level chatty version of what this book is about? Give people a primer.
Yeah, so this book is about war, food, displacement, but at the center of it, it's human first. I didn't know that those were your values at your organization. I'm going to actually use that. I'm literally going to write emails to people and say this is what this book is about, or what I hope this book becomes about.
That's gorgeous. Thank you. That's beautiful. So I had the privilege of reading your book before everybody else got to, which felt really, really nice and special.
Got an early
gorgeous.
copy.
I did. And in it, you called food a Trojan horse for culture. And it's sort of a way that we carry home through time and change. And for the folks in this room and the folks beyond it who are trying to hold on to who we are in this really fast-moving world, what has cooking taught you about how culture adapts and stays alive?
I think at the center of cooking, there's always people. When you think about kitchens, and this is what I talk about in this book so often, is that there isn't anyone anywhere on earth today that's not asking what's for dinner. You know, that nagging question. I got married about a year ago, and we moved in together about 2 years prior to that, and I remember as soon as he moved in, I started to think about dinner even more so. Every night became about, oh, what's for dinner? He'd be out working, I'd go, what's for dinner? To the point where we had to start creating structures around that question because it was becoming a little annoying. But this is what I found in writing this book, is that and safety are the only concerns that people have every single day. And I think for years, for me, I always thought that the kitchen was the epicenter of everything. It is for my family anyways. There's 10 children, so there's 12 of us. I've always, for the most part, lived in chaos and grown up in chaos. And so for my family and I, that's just what it was. But then when I took a step into the food world, cooking kind of became isolated. There was all this perfection around it. There was a lot of loneliness in testing and developing recipes. And then when I started to write in Baby's Kitchen is where I really found my footing, because I needed other people to tell those stories. And I think that's what this book is about. It's people first, and it's much more about communal eating and cooking and coming together. It's much more of a gathering than it is anything done in isolation or anything about war, I would say. And that's what, this has taught me in regards to cooking.
So on that note of community, there's so many, many people in this book that are pulling their communities together with sort of a spoon and a story. And I'm curious, that has to be a form of care, right? From your perspective, what does care look like in the form of a meal?
I think very often it starts with a question which a lot of these people asked when I went into their homes or when I was on the sidewalk in Beirut. People would say, "Have you eaten yet?" Or it would be a tug, or like someone trying to shove, a piece of falafel with all sorts of things you've never. And I'm like, what if I were allergic? And my photographer would often remind me. He would say, "You're not allergic to anything," but you wouldn't say no anyway. But it just is that, right? Like it's so minimal in the way that they show up because it's effortless, but it's so layered. And I think it's a bit of what we've forgotten here in this country. Lunches have become a thing that you eat standing up. Breakfast is on the go in the car, where in a lot of these countries, so much of it is, the center of it is a hug, a kiss, a hello, have you eaten yet? And when I think about what care is for me now, currently, this is what I think about.
Well, and I think that in that language of care, I think so many people, and this is a fine way to write a cookbook, they will tell you their story. And it's me, and I did this, and I came up through this kitchen, and I studied under this person, and I worked until 3 a.m., and why didn't you? I'm like, oh, 3 a.m. Which is fine.
Yeah.
But what I appreciated about this book in particular is that you did not stop at your own story. You gathered dozens and dozens more across 8 countries. And so Hawa and I had a chance to spend some time together earlier today. We talked about identity, we talked about narrative, and
Talk about care. Can we talk about care? Catherine and I have never met before, just online and on email. I left my wallet at home today. My husband sent it in a car behind me. The car was getting there just about 10 minutes before the gates were closing, so I couldn't go get the wallet from the driver. Anyway, the wallet has been retrieved. So I get to my hotel, it's time for me to check in, and I said to the people, I have a photo of my credit card, I'll do the authorization form. They're like, we don't know how to do that, and we don't. And so I was like, okay, I can call my husband who can do nothing, or I can call Catherine. Catherine runs over, she's like, what do you need? That's care.
we had a really, really nice time together. So I'm curious, when you are telling other people's stories, what responsibility did or do you feel in telling those stories better, deeper, more justly, with more empathy?
Well, number one, I think being a writer is very tricky. I think a lot of writers that I know, you're supposed to observe, and then you're supposed to put that on paper. And I think very often what I've seen with a lot of writers, brilliant writers, people who are much better at this than I am, is that you kind of miss the voice of the person that they're writing about. And I haven't lived enough life to tell these people's stories in the way that I've lived my own life, and I've had my own experience with displacement, and that's the introduction. And I thought if I had just stopped at my own story or my family's story, then that would be boring. Again, it goes back to that thing that you were saying about me, and centering myself in this much bigger narrative that is currently happening and that has been happening since the beginning of, it's been happening in my own country for 40 years. And so I think there's a responsibility, one, to not insert yourself in these stories that don't belong to you. I think it's also really important to hand the mic over and to say, you know what, you're the authority on this. You tell me how this recipe goes, and I'll try to translate it in a way that is authentic to you and your people, but also makes sense for the reader. So I like to think of myself, the way that I write these books is I take a recorder and I record people, and then I transcribe those interviews, and then I listen to them over and over, and I try to just write their words. And the only thing that I talk about this a lot in my own home, flowering of words, which I don't do very well and don't like. I try not to, and so I hope that that's, my desire is to always hand the mic over.
Did any of the stories that you told feel risky?
No, I wasn't going for a risk here. I think when we talk about displacement, the word itself is so loaded and peppered. So I was going for the opposite, the shock of the joy, the celebration, the community, the laughters, the call to prayer. Those are the things I talk about in here. Even, the getting hustled like you're in Las Vegas, in the DRC, I call it a shell game, but I'm not talking about guns. I'm like, no, I was like the person, I was the mark. And it was like, that's just what it was, right? And so I talk about that, but then I don't go into details on, safety or any, a lot of people have already done that. That story's been told,
So on that note, you say the world is burning and still we feed each other. On that note of joy, what is the most joyful dish in this book, and why does it get that identity?
Oh, talk about a loaded question. I mean, I think all these dishes are really beautiful. None of them are my own. They're not from my own country, so I feel like I can't have a favorite. But one that I've been making a ton recently is the Ali from the Egypt chapter. It's just a days old croissants pulled apart with like pistachio and heavy cream and all the good things and shredded coconut. It's really delicious. It's one pan, oven. It comes together quickly. That's one that I return to a lot because it's like savory and indulgent but not too sweet.
By the way, your husband is very lucky, and I hope he knows that.
He would say he's the cook in the family. I play one on TV is what he would say. Which is really, it's honestly true.
So I'm curious, all the people said, when I was reading this, I was struck that sort of every recipe in this book is truly a gift. It's a generous, generous gift. I know you just said you can't choose favorites, so a different way of asking that is, like, what was the greatest gift that someone shared with you while you were working on this book?
I met this man named Faisal, and he doesn't make it into the book, but he owns an incredible shop in Beirut, and everyone who I told I was going to Beirut said, you have to meet Faisal, you have to meet Faisal. So I met him, his wife, his daughters, and we made a day of just him, I kid you not, shoving food into our mouths. Me and my photographer who went to college with my husband and who's like 6'2", blonde hair, blue eyes, and never really, he's like, but by then we'd already done Congo together, and so we had formed trust. We've been through some things together, and so he was like, whatever Hawa says, we'll do. But Faisal really just, I think by the time we'd gotten to Lebanon, we needed a hug, we needed some rest, and he just embraced us. And he just was so joyous. We have a video of him, and I go back to it often. He was running up and down the block, feeding people. I mean, he would just grab random people and feed them and talk to them. And he spoke English, he spoke Arabic, he spoke Armenian, and I really had a good time with him. And when I think of him, I have very fond memories.
When you met him, did it make sense that people were like, oh, you have to meet Faisal? Like,
Yeah,
what is it about him that people are like?
He's like the heart of that town. Beirut is like Brooklyn. It's like big, small. I think a lot of people think it's, and the Lebanese will not like me saying this, but the Paris of the East, and like you get there and they're like, no, we're our own, and they take care of each other, and everyone knows one another, and everyone went to university together, and everyone goes to the same bars, and they follow the same DJs, and it's really interesting to see how like it mirrors life in Brooklyn that I know of.
Can we? First thing I asked you is to fill the blank, and you answered with remark about your mother. Can we talk about your mom?
Sure.
Okay, so my mom's right here.
We talked about you at lunch.
So I'm curious, your mother, she opened a store in the Dadaab refugee camp. You created a cookbook that elevates so many unspoken stories. And in many communities, many communities, it is so often women who take the first step towards rebuilding and imagining and creating. And so I'm curious, from the women in your life, from the women that you've connected with as you've traveled, what have you learned about the power of giving as a place to begin?
Oh, what have I learned about? Oh, I'm trying to unlearn giving so much. You know, when I think about just my mother, and when I think about the women around my mother and my aunts and the women that I even met on the road, there were women who took really great care of me in Monrovia in Liberia. I have women like that in my life here in America, where the thought of them is so foreign to them. It's like the person standing in front of them needs whatever their need is, whether it's a cup of water, a cup of coffee, no matter what time of the day it is, that supersedes anything of theirs that is a need to them. And being a Muslim person, that's how I was raised, is to think about other people first and then yourself. I think what writing this book taught me was to keep a little something for myself. I think when you're taught to constantly give, and I think there's some people that do it without a second thought. Like, I'm now at the place where I'm like, oh, what next for me? You know, like, who takes care of me in these moments when I've run dry, right? When you're the pawn or the mark in Kinshasa. And I did have a lot of great care in Kinshasa, by the way. But so I've learned that you should give without thought, and you should give as much as you can, but you should keep a little something for yourself.
Follow up then, who is it that takes care of you? Who is that person?
Oh, I have so many good people. My husband, my mother-in-law, my girlfriends. I've got great friends. My sisters. I've got 4 little sisters.
How was it, what did the community feel like? You didn't create this book alone.
Yeah.
And so photographers, friends, family, cooks, how did that collaboration work and how did it change you?
It made me a better communicator. I now know that next time I need to hire a production group to do all of the comms. I feel very lucky that at this stage of like book tour now, I have a whole team that's like taking care of me and doing all of the communications, which is fantastic. But you know, cookbooks are for most people, they're an act. Making them is an act of love. There's not a lot of money in making them. They're much more of a marketing tool than they are a cash cow. And so everybody who came on really came on from that place, like, I just want to make this thing happen. And everyone was patient and kind, and we all just got together on Tuesday to celebrate the launch, and it was so interesting to see people who I hadn't seen for a year or so just be so elated at their contribution, you know. And I said on Tuesday night that these things are not done in pockets, you know, they're done with people. Like, I could never make this book by myself.
Where does the sense making within it come from? You know, you say that you started with making your voice notes, Zoom calls, your own memory, other people's memories that you're borrowing from. Is there a power in starting small? Like, how do you get started? For anybody, I actually have a question for everybody here. In the last week, how many people in this room have felt overwhelmed at some point? So, for somebody who wants to create something meaningful, like, what is your advice for starting small and sort of doing the doable and getting started?
I think you don't ruminate on the idea too long. I think a lot of great ideas die at, you know, the thinking over and over and over and over about what it could be. I think if you have something, you just write it down, and you continue to write it down until it's something. But I've always and I think Will Smith talks about this where he's like, you have to be a bit naive in order to make things happen. I've always been a bit delusional. I have, when people came up with this trend recently about people being delusional, I'm like, yeah, it's me. And it's kept me safe, and it kept, it's got me to where I am. I will have an idea, I think about it a little bit, and then I put it on paper, and then I start to figure out who can help me make the thing a thing. And I'm very lucky to have a lot of supportive people in my life that see value in my thoughts. But I think once you prove to yourself that you can make something happen, everything else is like, everyone else is secondary. They just come along. They're like, oh yeah, she's done it before. I don't know why they let me do this, but
because you're wise. So this next round, we're gonna swap out the term lightning round for wisdom round, because Hawa dropped, like, I'm not kidding, you dropped like a few quotable things on me over the course of 60 minutes today where I was like, oh, that has actually shifted my perspective, and I'm borrowing that, and I need to remember it. Like, there were things that I was like,
I took something from you when we were talking about my friend.
yeah.
You said, oh my God, I have to remember it. Oh my God, you said something so brilliant. No, it was you today, but go ahead. I'm gonna remember.
So for this wisdom round, if you could serve one dish from this book to the peacemakers of the world, what would it be, and what story would you tell with it?
Oh, to the peacemakers. Probably the fin mashi, which is it's a stuffed pepper with rice and beef. You can't go wrong with it. It's also one pan. It's saucy. It's juicy. The peppers don't fall apart like most people think that it would, because you steam it. You don't cook them. You just like stuff them and then steam them. Yeah, probably that.
It's lovely. So when you think about this, goes a little deeper. Your work illuminates lives and experiences that are so often overlooked or misunderstood. And in this room, I think every single person who's here today, for many, many reasons, knows how powerful it is to not only own your story, but reclaim your story when it feels like it has started to become somebody else's. When it comes to refugees and displaced people, what is one narrative or misconception that you have felt urgently called to rewrite?
I don't know that I felt urgently to rewrite this, but when I was younger, and the reason why my mom started that dry goods store in the Dadaab refugee camp was because she always said this, and she still says it. Do they think we're poor? We're not poor. People, they did not have resources. They just didn't have a place to go to that was safe. And I think that's something that I always think about even when I travel to a country like El Salvador, where people were like, I actually never knew anybody who had gone to El Salvador before I went in 2020 to do research for this book, and people were like, it's very dangerous. I was like, well, damn, I'm from Somalia. Like, how much more dangerous can it be? But even Somalia, I'm like, my dad is like herding camels. He's living his best life. I'm like, I don't know whose story that is, but I think if it's one thing, it's just that single origin story. Like, if I can help shift that and say like, hey, and then there's more, that would be impactful to me.
I like that. And then there's more.
And then there's more. Oh, that's a book. And I remembered what you said earlier. You said about being in relationship with the expectation and not me. That was good.
So to close out our questions, and then we're going to allow folks in the room to ask questions. If we invited you back in 10 years to release And Then There's More by Hawa Hassan, what story would you be telling?
Well, I'm working on a book currently about global dispatch around the lunch hour, about what lunch means globally.
Can you say more? Like, what happened in your life that made you think, like, oh, this is like, there's a thread to pull here?
Oh, it's gonna sound so silly, but I was just right after I got married last year. I was sitting outside of Brooklyn Hospital in Fort Greene, where I've lived for 20 years. And we have the biggest high school, I think, in Brooklyn, or maybe even in New York, in Brooklyn Tech, which is like a brilliant high school where kids from all over New York come to. I think it's 20,000 of them. And so it was the hospital workers, the children, and they were all, some were smoking, some were eating sandwiches standing up, some were gossiping. And I was across the street at a French bistro having a glass of wine, watching this all unfold. It was May of last year, and I thought to myself, I said, what an odd way to observe lunch. You know, we're all doing something different. And then I started to think about, well, how do they observe lunch in Japan? And what about India, where, you know, there's the tent, you know, they send the tents to work. And I just started to think about, I was like, and then what about these countries that are being demolished, like in Portugal and Lisbon, where I just spent a summer. I was like, oh, these people are losing, you know, small shops to big developers. And so I think there's a good story there. So don't wait 10 years to invite me. I might go broke. Invite me in 2 years.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for your generosity of time and spirit. I am going to turn the mic over to all of you. We've got 15 minutes for questions. Burning ones, quiet ones, rambling ones. My only request of you all is that no one comes forward with this is more of a comment than a question, remark, unless they're going to compliment it, which is totally fine. So after that, there will be a book signing, you'll get to meet Hawa, and maybe you'll get some recipe inspiration while you're at it. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for being here. In a tornado.
Is there anybody who would like to kick us off?
Riley, you have something to say?
I have a question. Is there something that we didn't cover that you really want us to know, either about yourself or your story or the book?
Nothing about the book. I think we're living in such an interesting time, and I think so many of us participate in social media. I would think about why you consume the things that you consume and what they do for you and what they do for other people that don't look like you.
I have a question. I have two questions.
Okay.
I apologize if I missed it earlier, but how did you come up with the idea for this book? And how did you decide when you mentioned your person that you saw on the video?
Yeah.
You said, he wasn't in the book, but, so how did you decide who was going to be in the book, and all the people you met?
Yeah.
So the book was originally born out of a desire to tell a deeper and a better story about my own story and where I come from. I grew up in Somalia and then was sent away for 15 years and lived alone in Seattle for some time. And when I reunited with my family in 2008, they were living in Norway, and I started to think about, I can't be the only person that feels like this. You know, I felt other in my own family. Even though I was the eldest daughter, I was like, I don't know these people. You know, and I had all these other feelings of abandonment and sadness, and I thought I'd work through all of that living in Seattle, because I had a perfectly fine childhood. I grew up, raised really well, had all the best things you could think of, and then there I was again, gripped by the grief of what wasn't. And so, you know, then that set me off to getting into food and quitting my old job and starting this whole journey of just trying to discover myself through food and storytelling. And so this book was born from that. And Basil didn't make it into the book because I had 8 countries to cover, and I had already met people. So my friends in Brooklyn, Omar and Rami, I talk about them in the Lebanon section. They made me a list of people to meet. And so I'd already had people I was going to interview, and he was like a must. Like, I must see the way that he does business. I must see how he treats people in the community. But I just thought there were other stories that expand time and, you know, were closer more to the stories that I'm trying to tell. And so in the Lebanon section, you'll meet Mikey, who's an entrepreneur activist.
Congratulations on your recent marriage. I'm curious what role food, if any, what role food played in how you celebrated this new chapter of your life.
We got married in Mexico City. If that tells you anything, that's like a food haven. It's a place we love and a place we return to often. It was also a place we knew that all of our family can come to for visa purposes. We had a communal meal, so we didn't have individual plates. Everything was shared. We had a whole fish, which was so important to my husband because that's how the Ghanaians eat. We had jollof, which I thought was so, their tomatoey rice, which I thought was so strange because I was like, they're not gonna make it right. But you know what? It turned out just fine. People still say that it was some of the best wedding food that they've had, which makes me happy. But I didn't really have a lot to do with it.
Follow-up question. As a chef who is hosting your own wedding, do you feel pressured?
No.
You don't? Okay.
No, I wasn't even thinking about the wedding. But my husband, he lives to eat, and I eat to live. Does that make sense? Like, I'm just trying to survive, and he wakes up thinking about his food for the day, which is, so he did all the wedding food. Yeah, very interesting person. This is my second book. Yeah. The first book was about the Indian Ocean and 8 African countries that touch it from the perspective of grandmothers.
With regards to your travels and the individual locales, how much of I'm assuming that a lot of the diet there is based upon food that can be grown locally, and I'm curious what percentage or what portion is plant-based?
Oh, that is so interesting. So, and I say this to people all the time. It is only America where we eat meat the way that we do. Globally, meat is eaten like in celebration or like on a special occasion of sorts. And so there are a ton of, so the way that I selected these recipes and the way that my team and I researched them was that, would this look like an Egyptian kitchen? Would this look like a Lebanese kitchen? So each chapter has 8 recipes. So you can imagine what we were trying to do, show a variety of what that kitchen would look like. So each chapter has like a variety of vegetables, sides, meats, sauces, some of them spices. And so there's a good amount of, veggie options. But in Baby's Kitchen, it's almost all veggie. And people are always shocked. They're like, I had no idea.
And a follow-up to that, in your travels, what has been the most unique way you've enjoyed an ingredient you wouldn't normally expect?
So I didn't really like za'atar before, which is a Lebanese spice, or even the 7 Lebanese spice, which is it's like cardamom, cumin, turmeric, saffron. I didn't cook, and I was just telling somebody the other day, I didn't really cook, cool, and heat together the way that I do now, and I cook with them almost every day now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I have 2 questions as well. The first one is just to ask you, I guess in a different way, what were your criteria for selecting the recipes in the book? Like, which ones would be in, which ones would be out? That's my first question. And then I'll go to the second, if you'll let me.
Yeah, so when I say Amy Stevenson, who worked with me on this book, and who's my culinary director and has been a friend for 15 years, we poured over research. I mean, across anything that you could think of that would be online or in books or videos that was about these cuisines. And then the last step, which is always the hardest, is we went to people from those places. And so there were some recipes that we did for the Lebanon chapter, and people were like, no, that's from Syria. We got it from the Syrians, and so we had to scratch it. Or, there's a lentil soup in the Iraq chapter, and we didn't know this. I think it's called sobrat, and so that's what we called it. And the person who corrected our recipes was like, no, you have to tell people what type of soup it is. So it's ade. So just stuff like that, like, so it's like lentil soup, right? And there's like these date cookies, and they're like, no, you have to tell people that it's a date cookie. And so there's a lot of corrections and a lot of small tweaks that I didn't anticipate. But that's how we ultimately ended up choosing the 8 recipes that represent each chapter.
Okay, my second question is, so I have the first book, brought it with me so I can get it signed. And I love it, and I have made some of the recipes in there, and so I really applaud you because they're rich and wonderful recipes, very nourishing. And I love the theme of the first book. You mentioned, grandmothers in 8 different countries, primarily in East Africa, and I love that theme as well because, I really believe women feed the world, and there's just so many ways to come at that theme, and I don't know the second book, but is this still prominent in the second book as well in terms of who does the cooking and who's being showcased?
No, I really wanted to move away from that, but there are a lot of women. There are women entrepreneurs. There's Egyptian woman that I interview in the Egypt chapter, and she teaches martial arts. I think there's so many stories to be told. I think that in Bibi's kitchen, the grandmothers were adamant that there were systems which they were born into, and that's what they follow. And in this book, it's not so much about that at all. Even in my own life, it's not about that. Even though I'm the eldest daughter, Muslim, whatever, I don't cook like that in my house. I have a capable person, who can also cook. So he cooks. He cooks for friends. He cooks, and he's African, and so I think it's up to us to change that conversation. And I hope this book sheds light on that too. Hi.
Hi, I'm me. I'm Oromo from Ethiopia. So in the first book you have Eritrea, which is the same food.
Yep.
Ethiopia. When people say Eritrea, the Ethiopians say no, it's our food. But it was the same country, right? You get a chance to visit like the Ethiopian part. But even within the country, there's a lot of different foods. And also you say food is a way that really has identity here. I learned from my mom. Now my son who born and raised here starts cooking. It's African food we love, and the country that they don't know, but they connect to this cookies. And just when I wanted to check both countries.
Ethiopia and Eritrea.
And
I didn't have a U.S. passport when I made in Bibi's kitchen, and so I did a lot of that on Skype. If you could imagine, Skype was around in 2018, so I did a lot of that on Skype, and I sent Khadija, who photographed the book, and then I did all the interviews on online. Yeah.
hopefully you will get a chance.
But I have been
The kitchen.
I've been to Addis. More recently. Yeah. But I would love to go into it. Ethiopian food and Japanese food are my favorite food in the world.
I think we have time for one final question. Catherine.
Hi, great story, great book. So, doing a book is a journey. What's been your greatest lesson and reflection at the end of that book?
Of writing books,
This book.
this book. I want to be honest with you. I think publishing is at a very tricky point right now. And I just was saying this to my friends in the car that I think it's up to the reader to demand what we want to see and what we want to read and what we want to be made. Because the way that books are currently being bought is based on social media followers. And the way that things are being supported is based on that. And I'm afraid we're gonna lose people who could tell really brilliant stories because we don't see the value in what they have to say because they don't have a large following. And so I think that's what I've been wrestling with lately.
Thanks, Howard.
Okay, thanks to you of this then. If you don't mind. I'm just complaining about social media in here. Because if I don't, they'll be like, what did you get? Okay.
Okay, everyone. 3, 2, 1.